Directed by Tim Miller, known for Deadpool, and sort of produced by James Cameron, responsible for making the first 2 Terminator films the absolute classics they're remembered as today, the 6th entry in the series, Terminator Dark Fate, was to act as a kind of soft reboot, retconning the events of T3 and onwards and aiming to get the franchise back on track, just as its predecessor Genesys had tried and failed to do so before it. Dark Fate released in late 2019 amidst a wave of controversy. The film had a rocky start right from its unveiling. It was instantly criticised for its casting and plot synopsis, alongside the strange combative behaviour directed towards fans from director Tim Miller, and was destined to be a box office flop, no matter how much shallow fan service and member berries they sprinkled in. I never even bothered watching it myself when it first released, and only got round to doing so just now, over 2 years later. What I was greeted with was what can be summed up as a shitty, rehashed version of Terminator 2, almost a parody of it with some of the dumb stuff that the characters say and do.
I will be needing your blazers, your flannels, and your floppy hair.
One of the very few things I liked was that not only does Arnold Schwarzenegger return once again, but also Linda Hamilton was back as Sarah Connor for the first time since T2, and not just some stand-in that looked and acts nothing like her like in Genesys. Both actors do a good enough job with what they were given, in my opinion, but even with as good actors as they both are, they can only do so much with the poor script and direction they've each been given. Arnold is back as yet another Cyberdyne Systems Model 101, or a T800 as everyone on the internet thinks they're called for some reason, even though they never call it that in the actual films themselves until about the 4th or 5th movie. It was always called the Model 101, just look at the poster for the first film. Anyway, he's been sent back in time to kill John Connor, and succeeds this time, which annoys me, but I'll get into that later. How does sending multiple Terminators back even work anyway? How does Skynet know when one's failed its mission and then think to send another one after? In the first film, it just sends back the one in desperation during its final moments as it's on the verge of losing the war to the humans, and it sends one Arnie, which is then followed by Kyle Reese, and then the Resistance blows up the time machine. Even T2 happening doesn't make sense, but at least that film is such a good follow-up that you can let it slide. Would Skynet have sent all 3 at the same time then, just to be certain? You have the one sent to 1984 to assassinate Sarah, the liquid metal one to kill John in 1991, and then this one to kill John shortly after the events of T2. It's all over the place and shows how the first movie was meant to be a one and done story, but they just had to keep dragging the franchise's corpse back out of the ground every time the studio wanted to make a quick buck. And that's just this new timeline that retcons the events of Terminator 3. If you're talking about the old timeline, then Skynet would have to have had sent back even more Terminators. If that's the case, then why not just send them all back to 1984 as an army so they can work as a team and there'd be no way they could fail? But the worst thing about this movie's depiction of Arnie's character is that they make it that after completing his mission, it then just wanders off and then starts thinking about what he's done, then grows a conscience and becomes self-aware, and then feels bad for murdering John, and then he starts calling himself Carl and decides to integrate with society and shacks up with a mother and child and opens his own drapes company. That is actually a thing in an official Terminator sequel. Like I said earlier, this is more like a parody of a Terminator film than a real one, and it really does demonstrate my point of how the writers of this film absolutely do not understand the source material whatsoever, and James Cameron's name is on it only purely for marketing. What happened to that line in the first film about the Terminator not feeling pity or remorse? Or in the second film, where he says he understands why people cry, but it's something he could never do. Even if their excuse is that his AI learns over time, that's only if his brain chip thing is set to learning mode like in T2, but he got Sarah to do that, he can't take it out himself and set it to do that. So stupid. And then we have Linda Hamilton back as Sarah Connor, who does do a good job and is believable. I know she's old, but I think she still does a good job pulling off an aged version of the character. Something that's said about her character that I thought was weird was that after John is killed, she's since been locating and hunting Terminators that get sent back. But Terminators have always taken multiple people, a lot of weaponry and pure luck to defeat just one on its own, but now she just goes around hunting them alone at like 60 years old. And just how many must have been sent back over the last 30 years since John was assassinated? So then next we begin to get into the new characters who I did not take to whatsoever. There's Dani, who's basically just a replacement for John Connor, except with none of the charisma or personality. Now she's the destined saviour of humanity from a different AI called Legion that rose instead of Skynet after Cyberdyne was destroyed. By the way, Legion has to be the most obvious and unimaginative name for a rogue AI I think they could have come up with. And then the last of the good guys is Grace, who's the protector of Dani. Like Kyle Reese or the Arnie Terminator from T2, she's a half human, half Terminator cyborg. A lot of other reviews I've watched say they didn't like her until they watched it, and then they did like her character, but I disagree. I still found her to be annoying, generic, and totally uninspired. And she has the biggest flaw in that she can only fight for a short time before her metabolism overheats and she needs to keep finding and taking medicine or else she'll slip into a coma and die. So she's pretty much useless as a protector. If that's the case, why can't they just capture and reprogram a real Terminator like they did before then? And rounding off the main cast, we have the bad guy Terminator, the Rev 9, who is one of the only other things I actually liked. Although not so much the actor that played him, but more the character design, as I did think it was cool and a logical next step after the T1000 and TX, where he is liquid metal over an endoskeleton like in T3, but this time the liquid metal can separate, essentially splitting into two Terminators, one solid, one liquid. I thought it was a pretty good idea for a Terminator design, and that how they showed it has positives and negatives when separating, because when it split, it became two Terminators, and they could cover more ground and operate as a team. But when it did that, then the endoskeleton couldn't disguise itself or make knives, and the liquid one couldn't take as much damage and could be slowed down easier. So this gave it a reason to switch between being one and being two Terminators, and I think they did a good job of showing us this throughout the film. But on the downside, I share the same opinion as others how the actor just isn't very imposing looking. I remember people used to say he looked like someone who worked in an Apple store, and it's not helped by the fact that during every encounter, despite being the newest, most advanced Terminator, he never seems to be able to land a single hit and gets his ass beaten by Grace in every encounter. It became frustrating because he's meant to be this threatening antagonist, but he gets defeated in every fight they have. With Kyle Reese and Arnie in T2 and T3, you got the feeling that the baddie was more powerful and they could only be held off for a limited time before the good guys would get overwhelmed, and they couldn't rely purely on brute force. But here, the bad Terminator is more like an annoying fly that keeps buzzing around. So the film begins with Sarah and John in a bar after Terminator 2, and then another Terminator just walks up to them and shoots John and kills him, which basically just says that the first two films were for nothing and it was all pointless. Kyle Reese travelling back, Sarah preparing John, the reprogrammed Terminator, Miles Dyson, Cyberdyne, the Terminator sacrificing itself, everything in the first two films was all just a big waste of time. That is until they make the next Terminator film, and that one will yet again be the quote-unquote true Terminator 3, which will be what, the fourth time? And then that one says Dark Fate isn't canon. But until that day comes, we're stuck with Dark Fate being the official canon after T2. Then the Terminator struggles with Sarah for a few seconds, and then just leaves without killing her when it had the opportunity because reasons. The de-aging did look quite good though on them all. When we see the Rev 9 and Grace coming back through time, it was weird because The whole deal with that was that only organic stuff could go through, but not inanimate stuff or metal, so no weapons or clothes, etc. But we just see the Rev 9 just comes through, so I guess they've just dropped that whole idea now. In Terminator 2, the liquid metal Terminator came through, but you didn't actually see it, so you could say it was still open to interpretation somewhat. In my mind, I used to think that maybe he could have been inside like a skin bubble thing, and then he could just rip that open and come out, but here it's just conveniently ignored. Then next we see Dani going to work at a car factory, but the Terminator is disguised as her dad and tries to shoot her, but she's saved by Grace. She gets a uniform and a gun from a security guard, but would they really need armed guards in a car factory? I'd be curious to know if that's really a thing in Mexico. Then we get the highway chase scene that was shown in the trailer, and it's basically like a less cool version of the car chases from the first 3 movies, and they literally showed every second of it in the trailer, so there's almost nothing you've not seen if you've seen the trailer first like me. This scene demonstrated that the CGI for the most part is pretty mediocre, and it shows in this part in particular. It's painfully obvious and it doesn't hold up even after only 2 years, so I can only imagine how bad it'll look in say 10 years time. And then we meet Sarah and she saves them, but they take Grace to a motel because she needs medicine. Then they want to find out who's been tipping Sarah off about where and when the new Terminators have been appearing, so they cross into America through the border and get captured and have to escape, which was kind of a pointless scene because not much interesting happened and it just slowed things down. Then when they get into America, and it's the bit where we see Arnold and find out all the stupid stuff about him wanting to be good now, and his drapes business, and now he's got a wife and all that crap. This Terminator has not been reprogrammed, mind you. He is identical to the one from T1, so I suppose in the first movie that Terminator would have done the same thing afterwards if he'd succeeded. This film's such garbage, it's easily the worst Terminator film, by the way, easily. I can't remember exactly when it happened, but Grace has a flashback to the war, and we see her injured and how she became a cyborg, but the aircraft they're all riding looks more advanced than what Skynet has, or I should say what Legion has. And how do they have the technology and all the resources and doctors and the facility to turn a person into a half Terminator thing anyway? Because they are the Resistance. In the first movies, they were supposed to be rebels and humanity was clinging to survival. They were huddled around flaming trash cans and eating rats. But here, they have more advanced technology than Skynet. Then they go to the airbase and there's the aeroplane scene. Then they crash and then they're in the dam scene, which is where the final fight with the Red 9 takes place. And then Grace and Arnold both sacrifice themselves to defeat the Rev 9, and then that's the movie pretty much over. And then at the end it's Sarah and Dani and they drive off in a Jeep like at the end of T1. So overall, an absolutely awful film. The stuff I liked was that, 1, it had Linda Hamilton playing Sarah Connor, and 2, I liked the kind of mechanical design aspect of the Rev 9 where it splits into 2, and the stuff I didn't like was everything else. To give it a score, I give it 1 out of 10, and I was absolutely right to not bother watching it at the time of release, and I'm glad I didn't pay anything to watch it either. When I put it on, I wasn't sure if I'd do a review of it or not, since it's over 2 years old and no one cares anymore, and this review will probably only ever get like 20 views, but it just pissed me off so much I wanted to talk about it. So that's the review. Remember to like it and let me know if you've seen the film and what you thought of it, and I'll see you next time.